Hey everybody, today I am going to be reviewing A Quiet Place, which I finally got a chance to see. This was directed by John Krasinski. Of course, Krasinski, who also stars in the film, plays opposite his wife in real life, Emily Blunt, and they have two children in real life, and you can tell that this film is a very personal one for them, where the familial bind is the core of the story. These two parents are working together to create something that I think a lot of people, a lot of guardians, a lot of parents can relate to. It's the feeling of needing to protect your children at all costs, and the idea that no matter how much you want to have control over those sorts of things, how much you want to believe that you can always keep your children out of harm's way, you really can't. And eventually you're going to have to come to terms with that danger. We all have to. And overcoming that danger is what this film is really about. This movie takes place in the not so distant future. It is set in a post-apocalyptic world where the human race has mostly been destroyed by these big creatures that are very reminiscent of like the clickers if you played The Last of Us, just in terms of the design and the function and all of that. But in this film, these creatures have this hypersensitive hearing, and they hunt their prey based on the sounds that they make. So you've got this family, a mom and a dad and their children. One of them is already deaf. So in that way, maybe they've been able to last a little bit longer than a lot of other people because they already know sign language and they're used to that sort of communication back and forth. But they have to live their entire lives as quiet as possible. No talking, no nothing. And that is how they survive. I love this premise. It is a fantastic one. And it allows you to play a lot with all kinds of different things. It allows you to play with mood, with sound design, obviously, and with those classic suspense elements. And they really do utilize that a lot here. And you can sense Krasinski's love for all of those genre pieces because a lot of that, this film is inspired by a lot of those. And even though he may not be somebody who's directed a lot, he's certainly no master of the medium, you can sense that this story and just the way that it's shot and everything like that, you can tell that there's a lot of heart going into it, a lot of work. It really means something to him. And I like to see that. He described the film as a love letter to his kids. And I think it always makes something better when the film you're watching is more than just a cash grab, because that happens so rarely nowadays. He is using a lot of genre staples that he's borrowing from other suspense directors. You get a little bit of Spielberg, you get a little bit of Hitchcock, definitely a lot of M. Night Shyamalan was definitely popping up in my head, because it does have that same kind of schlocky B-horror movie feel, which is fun for sure. I think the strongest aspect of this film is just the pacing of it. The flow. It is very succinct. It's very consistent. It never loses steam, and you are completely immersed in this world from beginning to end. And you want that from a movie that is basing everything on the way that it climaxes, based on the tension, the suspense, what raises the stakes for the family. And the emotional thread that is woven through the film remains intact. And I think that a lot of this has to do with the children. They got wonderful children to play these roles, very expressive faces. I think that the daughter, the deaf daughter played by Millicent Simmons, is absolutely wonderful in this film. She stood out to me because she has a real maturity about her for somebody so young. The way that she expresses herself through her eyes, she doesn't have to do much, and we know exactly what she's feeling. I found myself most interested in her character mainly because of that, because of how reserved she is. She is more interesting to me because she's frustrated and she's bitter towards her father for a lot of reasons, yet I don't think it has diminished her at all. She has a strength to her. She maybe has the most dramatic arc of all of the characters, and of course her lack of hearing becomes a crucial plot point, a plot device that comes into play later. And they are planting a lot of those plot devices early on, and you can see how they're all eventually going to mean something later on, and especially in the third act. So things like the wife being pregnant, a nail being in the floor, her hearing aid, the daughter. All of these things will come together in the final stretch of the film. And perhaps it's a little too conveniently placed for my taste. When all the arcs come together like that, it feels a little bit forced, and for me, it makes the emotional crux of everything feel a little bit muddled. Third acts are so hard to pull off, and especially in Hollywood movies. Very rarely do I see it pulled off well anymore. I wish they would be willing to play with structure a little bit more, and also play with the idea that less is more, because that's something that I feel is lacking here. While the movie is very affecting and it is very moving, I just wish that they pushed a lot of things further. And as it stands, a lot of it is very surface level, though of course still entertaining. One thing that I think might have been interesting is for them to just completely omit the musical score, or if they're going to include it, it should be very, very minimal, and it should only come in maybe in the third act. That way we can really immerse ourselves in this world. We can feel the silence and experience all the textures of the world, so that that sort of becomes the music, so that that becomes the rhythm. I think that if you're going to explore a premise like that, I think explore it with confidence, go all in. I kept thinking about The Birds, which is a movie, of course, that was a classic movie directed by Alfred Hitchcock, and the way that they use the bird sounds rather than using an actual score, I think was way more effective because it made everything feel so much more real and more eerie. No Country for Old Men is another one that uses sound in a brilliant, brilliant way. And I'm not a huge fan of either film overall, but in terms of that aspect of it, I think they absolutely nailed it. No pun intended. Those films earned the buildup, the climax, so that when the bang really happens, it feels that much more satisfying. They understand subtlety, and that's why those films are revered for the filmmaking quality. Krasinski doesn't have that kind of confidence. I know he's relatively new to the directing world. He's never directed anything like that, so maybe that will come in time. I think a lot of people who watch this movie really like the sound design, and yes, it is well done in the sense that it's cohesive and the details really come out. You can tell that they put a lot of effort into making everything work. But to be honest with you, the more I think about this movie, the more that I found the sound to be kind of distracting in a lot of ways, because it is very overbearing. The music is very overbearing and it's too manipulative. The sounds and the jump scares and all of that just feel very forced. They feel too on the nose. The way they really dial it back and then amp it up at the moments where you're supposed to feel really afraid or whatever, it feels very expected, and I like the idea of kind of reining in a little bit. But at the same time, the more I think about this film, the more I do see that it is an homage to, as I said, a lot of those B-type sci-fi movies from the past. So a lot of what happens maybe is allowed to be a little bit schmaltzy, a little bit over the top, and you can sort of have fun with it, because I certainly did. And in that sense, it is very Shyamalan-esque. I mean, there's a lot of this movie that reminded me of Signs, for example. There are a lot of cliches throughout the film, certain kind of manipulative emotional devices, as well as when there's dialogue, there's not much of it, but when it's there, it tends to be a little bit clunky. And the one thing that I can't stand in movies is this one particular cliche. When you have a room filled with newspaper clippings and they're just attached to the walls are covered with it, and you've got this whiteboard that says, like, what is the alien's weakness? And it's purely for exposition. I have never ever liked that, and I am amazed that people can still get away with it nowadays just because it's been done to death. And we have another one of those here. But then again, there is that sense of humor to it that I keep coming back to. So if you look at it from that angle, then maybe it can work for you. So while I don't think that this film is brilliant by any means, overall, even though I've got my problems with it, obviously, it is very solid for what it is, and it's very effective. It maintains those suspense dynamics very consistently. And most importantly, this is the most important thing, it does not lose its heart. And as I said, this is a personal film and it shows. And for me, that's the key. That's why it all works. I do think that if you go see it, you'll be really entertained by it. So I am going to recommend it. And that is my review. Thank you all for listening. All my social media information is below. You can watch more videos here, and you can subscribe if you'd like. Catch you next time.